Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Parashat class, Parashat Pinehas. And the question is, why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah decide to record certain episodes, specific episodes in the Torah, and perhaps some not? And for that matter, why are some laws and mitzvot placed in different parashiot strategically around the Torah instead of all in one spot? Well, let me specify my question with more detail. We know that during their sojourn in the Midbar, 40 years in the desert, there were many national events. Those had to be recorded, be they tragic or historic or joyous. There were many thousands, hundreds of thousands of personal events, talking about over 2 million people. The vast majority, obviously, are not recorded, and there are some personal events that are recorded. Why is that? Furthermore, in terms of mitzvot, we understand that the Torah was given in the Har Sinai. Well, we see that mitzvot are spread and presented throughout the course of Torah. And in fact, here we are, Parashat Pinehas, at the end of the book of Bimidbar, and we're first being told of certain laws. We learn laws of inheritance and bequeathing of property, inheritance. Here specifically, Am Yisrael inheriting the land of Eretz Yisrael, and then some other laws of inheritance that came with it. Next week's Parashat, double matot, mas'ayin matot. First time we see about the laws of nidarim, of vows. And of course, the multitudes and plethora of mitzvot presented to us in the book of Devarim at the very end of the sojourn, the 40th year of the desert, when Moshe Rabbeinu presented to us those mitzvot, the many mitzvot in Parashiot Re'eh and Shofetim, of course, V'titeseh, some of which were never mentioned prior in the Torah. That's our general question. But I think that really segues us into a much more, you can say, question that's not only inquisitive, but could be disturbing. And that is, how is it that we have Har Sinai on one hand, Matan Torah, God's appearance in that incredible revelation on Har Sinai and gifting us the Torah, and on the other hand, mitzvot that are mentioned later on. Well, when were these taught? To Moshe, to the people? And we do have a argument, a dispute that's recorded. The Torah and Midrash, several places, records a Beraita, in which there was a dispute between Rabbi Akiba and Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Ishmael has a position that is less popular for us, and that is on Har Sinai and Mount Sinai, the Kilalot, only the generalities, the topic headlines, general mizvah categories were informed to Moshe Rabbeinu, and the peratim and the details were rolled out later on. And that means that the Torah, all its detail, according to Rabbi Ishmael, were not given to Moshe Rabbeinu, shockingly, on Har Sinai. And only later, as history played out in the course of the 40 years, were he given the details. While Rabbi Akiba, on the other hand, takes the position very strongly, the one that we can relate to in a much more traditional way, so to speak, that all the entire Torah, the generalities and the details, all the nuances, the minutiae, every last small bit of information on every single mitzvah was offered and taught to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai. And for some reason, they were only presented in the Torah throughout the 4 books, from Shemot through the book of Devarim. And that really then, at least if we take Rabbi Akiba's position, resolves the question of Moshe Rabbeinu himself. But what about Am Yisrael? There's less certainty. There is another machlok in the Gemara in Masechet Gitin Daf Samech that speaks of another dispute, where one position says that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Torah in segments and in many scrolls as time went on. And another position says, no, he wrote the Torah in one interval at the end of the 40 years. You see in Parashat Ta'azinu, there was a command to write the Torah. And there it was completely recorded in one large scroll, and that perhaps has implications seemingly for Bnei Israel. And it is evident that there were certain mitzvot that Moshe Rabbeinu saved, so to speak, for the book of Devarim. Those were much less relevant to those who journeyed throughout the desert for 40 years, and much more relevant to those who were entering Eretz Yisrael. Mitzvot hatiluyot ba'aretz, certain mitzvot that were dependent on the land of Eretz Yisrael, had to do with judicial system, had to do with agriculture, etc. So it does seem that Am Yisrael were not privy. However, let's go back to Moshe Rabbeinu, and let's, for argument's sake, take the position of Rabbi Akiva, and that is that Moshe Rabbeinu was given everything. Even based on that side of the argument, according to that understanding, based on that tradition that we really adopt, you can say, throughout the ages as our default understanding. He was told everything on Har Sinai. There are seemingly several exceptions. And I will point out 4 historical events in the Torah which seem to defy that general truism. And they are as follows. Event number 1. In the end of Parashat Emor in the book of Vayikra, there was an event where 2 Jews were fighting. One of them was a full Jew, but his father was a Misri. His mother was identified as Shalomit Bat Ibri. And because of within the course of their struggle, this Ben Isha Yisraeli, son of a Jewish woman, made him Jewish, but an Egyptian man, cursed Hashem. Like Kalel, Hashem, he cursed God. And the next pasuk after that tragic mini event says as follows: Perek Kavdal pasuk Yedbet vayenihu b'mishmar lefrosh lahem al pi Adonai. And they placed him, the authorities, the elders, with Moshe Rabbeinu's permission, obviously, b'mishmar, in prison, in a guarded area, in order lefrosh lahem, so the law seemingly could be explained to them through Moshe Rabbeinu by Hashem. And then the next pasuk tells us, "Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor." Indeed, there was a command from Hashem to Moshe that take this one who cursed me, God, in the name of God, and stone him to death. It's called a megadeth, the law of megadeth. Seemingly, Moshe Rabbeinu did not know the law, and for that reason, there was a period of time of uncertainty until Hashem communicated that law to him. Seems to be new. I will violate chronology for a moment and skip episode 2 and go to what I would call the more matching episode 3. In several weeks ago, Parashat Shelach in the book of Bimidbar. This is again the end of the parasha, right before the paragraph of Sisit. There was another incident. They were in the desert. Ish mekoshesh aisim b'yom Shabbat, and a person was caught red-handed. On Shabbat, he was mekoshesh aisim. The most popular view is that he was gathering wood. That's perhaps the melacha, the violation of me'amed, gathering growths from the ground into one area on Shabbat. Some say it was carrying, some say it was mechased, it was uprooting and harvesting from the ground. In any case, it was a Torah violation. And what happened? The reaction was, again, they put him aside, they incarcerate him, they put him in prison in a guarded area. Because it was not explicit what should be done to him. So while in the first episode it says Hashem to wait for a full explanation, here it specifically says because what to do to him was not explained. And the Midrash, the Gemara explains that with the episode of the curse of the Megadeth, they were clueless. And with the Mekoshesh Aisim, the violator of Shabbat here with the wood, it seems that they understood he was going to be a capital punishment, but we're not quite certain which type of the 4 types of capital punishment. The next pasuk Vayomer Adonai al Moshe, he should be killed. How should he be killed? Ba'avanim, he should be stoned to death. The punishment, the consequence for violating Shabbat, which is Sekilah. Okay, episode number 3. Now going back to Parashat Ba'alotecha, earlier in the book of Bimidbar, when Am Yisrael were rather ready to travel towards Eretz Yisrael, they paused because they had to bring, it was already second week of Nisan, they had to bring Korban Pesach. And then, of course, the famous scene where a number of men approached Moshe Rabbeinu and they said, listen, we're tameh. We are impure. We've contracted tumah. We've been contaminated. We were in the vicinity of a deceased. We can't present Korban Pesach. Why should we be penalized for this? Perek Het, Pasuk Het. Vayomer Alehem Moshe. Did Moshe quickly respond with the law? Absolutely not. He said as follows, I want you to pause, wait, let me check with God on this law. Let's open the book. Well, let's write the book, really. What Hashem will come in? Thus the advent of the laws of Pesach Sheni, the makeup for he who was either impure or someone that lived far and couldn't make it during the future days in the Beit HaMikdash to offer Korban Pesach the first time around. Here, more explicitly, it says Moshe. It didn't say they put him in prison. Moshe Rabbeinu said, wait, let's see what God will command. And finally, episode 4. Episode 4 brings us to our Parashat Pinehas, in the middle of the Parashat, after presenting the laws of inheritance of the land, after the census and the laws of inheritance, a famous, I can say, episode in the beginning of Parashat Perek Kav Zayin, that's chapter 27, first pasuk. This episode known as the one of Benot Selofhad, the daughters of Selofhad. But Tikrabna Benot Selofhad, Ben Hefet, Ben Gilad, Ben Machir, Ben Menashe, Mishpechot Menashe, Ben Yosef. So there is a family, 5 generations removed from Menashe. 4 generations removed was a gentleman named Selofhad. And his daughters, he had 5 daughters, seemingly no sons. Their names were Matalon, Noav, Hoglam, Lekav, Tirsah. Later in Parashat Mas'eh, they were listed in a different order. Hachamim say to tell us that they were of equal importance and greatness. And their claim, where did they, it says, Vatikiravna, and they approached. Who did they approach? To whom did they present themselves? Well, Pasuk Bet. V'ta'amoda lefnei Moshe, lefnei Azar HaKohen, lefnei HaNesiim, v'chol ha'edah. They presented themselves in front of Moshe, the high priest Elazar, all of the leaders of tribes, the Nesiim, and the entire nation. Only. What a scene. And their presentation, and I'll paraphrase the next few Pesukim, my father died in the desert. He was not amongst the rebellers of the company, the entourage of Korah. Rather, he died in his own private sin. Why mention that? Some say because those that were amongst Korah's company did not merit inheriting the land, which maybe simply because they rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe had a certain anger and attitude towards them. They clarified in no uncertain terms he was not amongst them. In a sin, he died. One of the opinions in the Gemara, ironically, his sin was he was the Mekoshesh. He was the gatherer or the violator of Shabbat with the wood that we saw in Parashat Shelah. In any case, their claim, their dispute, their inquiry was, Lama Yigarashim Avim. Here, we are daughters. Seemingly, we don't inherit. Only the males do. And the name and the inheritance and the portion of the land which would potentially come to my father will now be erased, not existent, disappeared. What happens? Is that the end of his lineage, of his legacy? Our family's name will not be represented in the land of Israel? Pasuk He Vayakreb Moshe Mishpatan Lefnei Adonai. And Moshe presented, notice the way this is being presented to us. Moshe presented Mishpatan, their rule, their case, their litigation, so to speak, to be adjudicated Lefnei Hashem, in front of God. That word Mishpatan, the word Mishpat, justice, their case, has a large nun sufit. The way it's written in the Sefer Torah, the nun sufit is written Rabbati, large. But Moshe, Hashem's response was, Ken benot Yisrael of Hadorirot. Ken, some say that means true. The daughters of Sulachat are speaking the truth, they're speaking correctly and accurately. And Hashem goes on to detail and elaborate that indeed, if someone does not have sons, then their next of kin is the daughters are first in line for inheritance, then the person's brothers, etc., the person's uncles. And thus, some of the critical laws of inheritance are presented to us over here. And we could ask, by the way, as an aside, why the Nun Sufit is large. We could also ask, why is it necessary why is it Hashem expressing that they are correct? Just say what the law is, and we'll know that they were correct in their claim or their request. So what we've at least found is 4 incidents where Moshe Rabbeinu seemed to be, if not clueless, at least uncertain. Those seemingly were not presented to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai. Let us specifically analyze 2 of them as presented to us by the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin. By the way, part of our question was answered. Of course, certain events have to be recorded because there are laws attached to those events. And therefore, without the event, the law maybe could have been presented, but in a vacuum, where did it come from? We see so perfectly that it was an attachment to an actual occurrence. Partially answers our opening question. Let's go to Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Het, talking about the Benot Zelofhad. The Gemara was actually quoting a pasuk from Parashat Yitro, where Moshe explained to his father-in-law Yitro, "V'hadavar asher yikshe mikem." I'm sorry, this was actually later in the Torah, in Parashat Devarim, reflecting upon how that superstructure of the judicial system, based on Yitro's suggestion, was put into place. And there, Moshe Rabbeinu says, the buck stops here. If you judges can't figure it out, bring it to me. I got it. I'll figure it out and I'll present the law to you. Says Rabbi Haninan, some say Rabbi Yoshia. Moshe Rabbeinu just had an air of arrogance to it. This is the most humble person in the world. But Moshe on his level was punished. How was he punished? Quoting the pasuk from the Benot Zelofhad, the daughters of Zelofhad episode in our parasha, that he was forced, so to speak, to ask God for a law. And here Rashi, who quotes this Gemara in our parasha, in the Benot Zelofhad episode, very, as Rashi does masterfully all the time, he manages to weave the Midrash's comment here and says that the law was nit'alem. Moshe Rabbeinu forgot the law, and that's what the Gemara is talking about over here, where he had to ask God for the law. Comes along, Rav Nachman by Yitzhak challenges that and rejects that approach, and he says, no, not at all. I based myself on the Beraita, who says that Parashat Nahalot, really the parasha of inheritance, the laws of inheritance should have been written only by and because of Moshe Rabbeinu, but Zachu Benot Zelofhad merited because of their righteousness to write it, so to speak, in their name or because of them. And in that, for that matter, the Baraita goes on to explain that the Mekoshesh, the person, the story of the Shabbat violator, also that should have been written, the law at least, attributed only to Moshe Rabbeinu, but it was attributed to the Mekoshesh because of his wrongfulness, because of his egregious act. To teach you that Megagalim Zakai, as Zakai, I'm sorry, Zechut Ayedeh Zakai, V'choba Ayedeh Hayab. In other words, when someone merits something, that they extend their merit and based on what they did righteously, they will be rewarded something in the same realm, and the same thing as someone's guilty. Okay, what do you see from all this? Well, if you leave the first opinion aside, that Moshe Rabbeinu forgot the law, the second opinion seems to say that Moshe Rabbeinu should have been the one presenting the law, but does this mean that he didn't know the law, or he did know it, but we just presented it because of the event as if he didn't know it? Indeed, in our parasha, the Mefarshim struggle with this and speak about the fact that even though Moshe might have known the general laws, but this nuance, there was something about, we won't go into the specifics here, there was something about here, the laws of inheritance and the case of Benot of Had, he just didn't get. It was difficult for him. Okay, so seemingly there were, based on these events, some laws that were not crystal clear to Moshe Rabbeinu. But I want to point out something specifically about the incident of Benot of Had and re-ask my question. And that is, the first three incidents, the one in Parashat Emor with the Megadef, he who cursed God. The one in Parashat Ba'alotecha regarding Pesach Sheni. The third one in Parashat Shelach regarding the he who violated Shabbat were all occurred in the first and second year of the Jewish sojourn in the desert. This episode of Benot of Had did not occur until the 40th year. And therefore, if indeed Moshe Rabbeinu was either unaware of this law, or a nuance or a specific aspect, a distinction within this law, in either case, or even forgot the law because he was punished, there is a law in the Torah that is unbeknownst to any Jew until 40 years in the desert first presented to us here. How are we to understand this? And I'll take it a step further. And that is that it is this one. Remember, two of them, it says they put him in jail, two of the episodes. They placed them aside. It didn't say specifically Moshe Rabbeinu. The one in Parashat Ba'alotecha, indeed it says Moshe said, wait to see what God says. A little indirect. But here, specifically and explicitly, Moshe said, Vayakreb, as if he had no clue. He offered, he approached at Mishpatan, their case before God. God, give it to me. I don't know what to say. Here it is. There's got to be a reason. It must be something about this very episode that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to hold off an actual law in the Torah until we lived through this episode. And indeed, some of the answers are within the nuances of the episode itself. That large Nun Sofi explains to us, Rabbi Hirsch, that perhaps that large Nun Sofi at the end of the word Mishpatan is to tell us that even though Moshe Rabbeinu was well versed in all the laws of inheritance, but this had to be asked for. This case was left over. This is outstanding and highlighted. This law was not yet known. Well, what did the Torah want to present to us in this scene? Perhaps the merits and greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu. As Rabbeinu Bachya takes a shot at the reason for the large Nun Sofit, and he says, this is a hint that whenever there's a Talmid Hacham with someone greater in knowledge, that they should defer to that greater person if he's in their presence to ask for the law and not present the law on his own. The greater entity here, that person, was Kadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe Rabbeinu here, not trying to figure it out or to derive from everything else that he knew using the different principles of study of Torah to Shabbat Peh, instead said, God, you take it. God's here, let me give it to God. A nice paradigm of humility and general respect regarding Torah study and education. Possibly. But the Emet Davar takes the other angle. And he says, no, I don't believe so. I believe that the large Nun was basically to explain to us the greatness of Benot of Had. And he says as follows. He says to teach us, look at the word mishpatan. It's a plural word. Moshe Rabbeinu presented their case. In other words, on one hand, let's ask about should daughters in general inherit when there is no sons? but in plural, because I also want to specifically present to you, Hashem, in public, to the eyes of all the leaders in all the nations, the case of these wonderful young women, because they are worthy to be identified and pointed out, says the Emek Davad, Bishvil Chochmatam V'Zichutam, because of their merit, because of their wisdom and their righteousness. My friends, think of this scene. These are young orphaned girls who are on their own. Do they have any surviving uncles? Perhaps. No brothers, no father who knows about their mother. And they were concerned. They had the very legacy of their family to worry about. What's going to be with us in Eretz Yisrael, our land, our representation? Where does my father's lineage end up? And therefore, with all sincerity and all bravery and guts, these 5 young orphans presented their case to none other than the chief rabbi Moshe Rabbeinu, all the leaders and all the nation. And they insisted on an answer. Humbly they inquired, but they demanded justice. And they said in no uncertain terms, we want an answer, but alluded to the fact that we believe we deserve a portion, an inheritance, and our family legacy and line should continue in the land of Israel. What a presentation by a group of young sisters. And on the other hand, says Abarbanel, the Moshe Rabbeinu in his reply said as follows. He said, listen, Moshe Rabbeinu was overwhelmed with compassion, with sympathy. He was gripped with his pity for these young girls, and he promised them, and he said, I won't let you down. I'm not going to budge until your case is dealt with and your inquiry is presented to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everyone's going to see this. I won't stop until it's over. And he said, there's no doubt that Moshe Rabbeinu in general mastered the laws of Yerusha. But this episode was left toward the end of the Torah and the 40th year of the desert because we wanted to be presented by Benot Tzolov Had. Because Moshe Rabbeinu got to it, there was a nuance that it was difficult for him, and that was done purposely. So all the nation can see these young, brave girls with their insistence, and on the other hand, Moshe Rabbeinu's compassion, who went to fight for the downtrodden, who went to find justice for those who were pleading for it. And for that reason, says Abarbanel, the answer was not just here is the law, but can Benot Tzolov Had Davarot, the truth they are speaking, or can it's just exactly the way they presented it, the way they insisted upon it, the law which they alluded to, and Moshe, which you sort of wanted to accept as well, but you didn't in front of me, God, can. It's exactly that. And I want everyone to know that and to see that because, my friends, this is nothing short of a heroic scene left to us, a law left out of the Torah because we wanted the nation at the time and us thousands of years later to witness what it means to pursue the truth, justice, not to be afraid when it comes to finding the ultimate truisms of Torah, and to pursue what is right, what is compassionate, what is righteous, what is proper. These young girls did that in a heroic and brave manner, and Moshe Rabbeinu, with all his compassion, fended for them, stood for them, fought for their cause until it got to the very same point that they were trying to reach as well. That is the point of truth, the point of justice, the point of the perfection of Torah HaKadoshah, even to the extent that Kadosh Baruch Hu left out a law for 40 years just to be able to demonstrate how people, how Jews, how women, how our leader felt about Torah HaKadoshah. Baruch Atah L'Olam. Amen. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.